is the ability to buy contraceptives that are now widely available. My Lord, all you have to do is walk into a 7-Eleven or any shop on any street in America and have access to them. Is that right to access those and to have them paid for? Is that such a towering good that it would suffocate the rights of conscience? I don't think so, but I hope the Supreme Court agrees.
While it has not occupied much of the top-line news in recent weeks, the Supreme Court decision in the Hobby Lobby case will have widespread ramifications. And those minimum wage protesters who wanted more money from fast food chains, don't say we didn't warn you about what might happen to your jobs. That and much more. Let's welcome into Midpoint Director of Health Policy and a Senior Policy Analyst at the Independent Women's Forum, Hadley Heath Manning joins us today on Midpoint. Hadley, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Is it not fair to say, I'm going to start right out with Hobby Lobby here, that as we wait for this decision, there are certain things that it won't resolve? For instance, I think people are still hoping that it will resolve or give us some idea of the actual legality of the ACHA, and it really won't go there to this point, correct?
No, these lawsuits are specifically about a requirement from the Department of Health and Human Services pursuant to the Affordable Care Act that defines, as part of the minimum essential health benefits required in each insurance plan, what type of preventative care services have to be available specifically to women. So this is a very specific mandate within a specific part of a very big bill. It's a bill that, as you may know, is about 2,500 pages long, and this is just one specific contention with that mandate.
What is the basic consensus here? And again, of course, you and I are not sitting here. I'm not a lawyer. I only play one on TV. You certainly have much more of a legal background than I do. But we're sitting here watching and waiting for the Supreme Court to make a decision on this. If you were to sit there and try to get in the minds of the justices as they're weighing this, what's going to be the one or two things that you believe is going to be those issues that will vex them the most in trying to make this decision?
Right. Well, importantly, people on the street have their own opinions about birth control and whether or not their employer should provide health insurance coverage that includes birth control and different types of birth control. But what the Supreme Court issue boils down to are two specific things. The first is First Amendment freedom of religion. That's something that the court will have to weigh and ask questions such as, how far are we going to go to apply those rights in the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights to groups of people when they work as for-profit businesses? So in this case, Hobby Lobby stores and Conestoga Wood, those are for-profit family-owned businesses, and the court may draw a distinction between them, individuals, or publicly held corporations, which are bigger. And the second major issue, of course, is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a statute from 1993. The court will have to weigh a couple of tests within that legislation that tell us how far the government can go in seeking a compelling public interest. So they have to weigh whether or not this birth control mandate serves a compelling public interest, and they have to ask, secondly, whether or not this is the least restrictive means to reaching that goal. So if they find that, for example, providing widespread access to birth control through employer-provided insurance is a compelling public interest, then they have to weigh whether or not the government took the least restrictive route to getting there. And I think that's going to be a very difficult case for the government to make.
I think here's the most difficult thing about it. If you listen to Hobby Lobby, and we have a sound clip I want you to hear, and this is the folks at Hobby Lobby saying that basically the government should not interfere with people's religious beliefs, and that is basically the main issue that they're standing on. Here's that sound.
Stand.
I would be inspired by the Hobby Lobby. I think they're just true Americans. They're saying, look, the genius of America is that religious convictions affect the way we act. America is at her strongest, at her best, when people can bring everything into the public square, including their moral, ethical, spiritual, and religious convictions. And the government should never force us to do anything that is contrary to those deepest held convictions.
Is there any thinking process here, Hadley, on this court itself when it comes down to religious convictions and how they might be swayed or where they might go, using those two words as part of their decision process?
Well, of course, I believe the Supreme Court and all the members of the Supreme Court believe in First Amendment rights for individuals. We saw that today as they unanimously affirmed that we have freedom of speech. Massachusetts actually had a statute that was struck down today in a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court that we have freedom of speech even within what were called buffer zones in Massachusetts around abortion clinics. So the Supreme Court believes in those rights for individuals, especially the freedom of religion has been sacrosanct in American constitutional law. But this is a question of how do we apply that to businesses? And the government has done a couple of things just in their actions, I believe, to undermine their case that groups of people don't have religious convictions. They have provided an exemption, for example, to this mandate for houses of worship or organizations that are explicitly religious, but they haven't provided further exemptions for family-owned businesses or groups of people that are hospitals, schools, and not houses of worship. So that seems to indicate that there's not a strong enough compelling government interest that they wouldn't make exemptions for some. And the question is, when do we stop or start being religious people? We're still religious and we still maintain those convictions even when we act in a for-profit business.
All right, let's turn to the economy here a little bit, economics, if you will, please. Millions of people struggling to get by. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden making jokes, backing up a little bit on some of their wealth issues right here. And I think it's got a lot of people very upset. They continue to back up on it a little bit, sort of make excuses again for what they may have said here. But isn't this just the wrong time, if you look at our history right now with so many people suffering, the wrong time to make any sort of jokes about your wealth and what you have and whether you're poor or not?
Well, this raises a question that's been at work in politics for a while now, and that is, how do Americans feel about wealth and poverty? Specifically, we saw in the last election cycle Mitt Romney, a very wealthy individual, running for president, and now it seems that politicians who want to vie for the highest national offices of the land want to reach out to Americans who maybe don't have as much wealth and at least pretend in some of these cases that they can understand. Hillary actually used the word dead broke. She said that she and Bill were dead broke when they were leaving the White House. And that sort of equates to a gaffe in her case, because we know that their financial situation was not like so many Americans who are suffering to get by today. But this is sort of a question of, do we aspire to be like wealthy people? Do we respect wealthy people? Do we believe that they've earned their money? Or do we despise wealthy people? And unfortunately, I think on the side of politics where Hillary and Joe Biden fall, there is more of a depiction of wealth as a bad thing. And so they're trying to shun any idea that they might be wealthy people themselves.
It's interesting. There have been a couple of stories this week that have talked about liberal millionaires who are unhappy or unwilling to tell people that they're millionaires because they fear what that reaction will be. Frankly, if you work for it, shouldn't you be allowed to say it anyway if you have money and just come right out and be honest about it?
Well, absolutely. You and I may not begrudge people for their wealth, but in politics, especially with the issue of wealth inequality being at the forefront of the Democratic agenda right now, the idea of wealth redistribution sort of it rests on the foundation that wealth is not earned, but it's something that people luck into, and then there's a sense of shame that comes along with that wealth or that success. So I think that's really the underlying question. Do Americans believe that wealth is something we earn and something to be proud of, or is it something that we should be ashamed of because it's just sort of circumstantial?
Couple minutes we got left here. This is interesting, and I've seen a couple of stories at different restaurants here. McDonald's is going to have an order ahead and payments app, and I have seen this tested. I don't want to say it, but I've seen it in a couple of chains, I believe, in different areas. Basically, no servers. Last time I checked, you take the servers out of it, that means somebody's losing a job.
Well, that may seem like a simple explanation on the surface level. It may seem that automation replaces people. You might have remembered from the president's speech several years ago when he blamed some of our economic troubles on ATMs. He pointed out that we no longer talk to bank tellers when we use ATMs. But that sort of economic and technological progress actually could represent the addition of more jobs if we look into different sectors. You know, it takes a different type of job to develop the software that you may use at a kiosk or on a smartphone to order a cheeseburger at McDonald's. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and if you look at the downstream effects, it's not replacing workers, but it is something that we should take into account when we examine how our economy is changing.
Briefly, though, isn't it fair to say, though, that there are workers out there who are seeing this, and there are some workers who will lose their job, at least in the early stages of this, as companies look to find new ways to make more profit and have fewer human costs involved on a daily basis, correct?
Well, there is something to be said for creative destruction, which is the economic progress or process of innovation, replacing different industries, replacing different types of jobs. So yes, you may see some shifting, but ultimately the net is as a gain for the United States. We count technological progress across the world as a net gain for economies employees as they see greater productivity.
Hadley, you can't stop technology one way or another, although last time I checked, hopefully they have still yet to come up with a robot to do the anchor's job, so I'm okay, and as an expert, you're okay, so I think we're in pretty good shape at this point. At least I would hope so. Hadley, Heath Manning, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do it again.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. It is fair, though. I mean, I've seen this at a couple of restaurants where they now have you go to the table, you sit down, you place your order, it comes to you. It has taken some people out of work. It has taken some jobs out of the mix here. Then again, as she points out, it will just take time. All right, a lot of things we have discussed here. We've talked about the Supreme Court. We've talked about jobs, so many other things. Now I'm going to put it to you because you get a chance to tell us what you think. We read them back here. Tweet me if you will. Tweet it to the hashtag midpoint as well. Also email connect@NewsmaxTV and go to the Facebook page. Yours truly is going to start wandering over to that Facebook page quite a lot here in the next few months. That's /MidpointTV because here we question everything.